What's up, everybody? On today's video, we're going to talk about the new law that is implemented in the state of Florida soon that will affect not only immigration, but also the world of real estate. The goal of this video is to educate people on the laws and how they could possibly be implemented. And while I'm not a lawyer, on the immigration side, this law has already proven disastrous for entire communities in the state of Florida. Businesses are closing, customers are gone. Usually, immigration law is a federal issue, and it will be interesting to see how a state will try to do a federal obligation. And while much coverage has been given to the potential immigration effect of this law, very little has been said about the real estate world. The implications in the real estate world for Florida with these new laws taking place could be absolutely disastrous. The new law will not allow foreign principals to buy real estate in the state of Florida. This includes agricultural land, and they're forbidden from buying real estate within 10 miles of a military base or crucial infrastructure, things like water treatment plants. That is logical if you think about the fact that there's markets in Florida where Chinese investors, people that live in China, are buying huge amounts of real estate. Now the American home buyer is buying a piece of land in South Florida to build a home, and they're competing with an exterior investor that perhaps has no real ties to the United States. The law imposes that these Chinese investors may be perhaps linked to communist parties and are trying to destabilize the American real estate market. But in reality, most likely they're people within China that don't trust the Chinese system and are putting their money in what they consider a more secure investment. Kind of counterintuitive for them to invest in a market only to harm it. Most realistic scenario, it's somebody in China who doesn't trust the Chinese system and puts their money in real estate in the United States because they think it's more secure. It really doesn't make sense that the person buying real estate in Florida should have to compete with a completely uninformed, speculative exterior component. Inherently, there's nothing wrong with preventing these people from investing in Florida. In fact, it was almost necessary. The problem, this law leaves a wide door open for racial discrimination, not of illegals or foreign principals, but of U.S. citizens. Because while the law stipulates who's not allowed to buy, it doesn't really regulate how it's going to be implemented. Means that most likely people who are U.S. citizens and allowed to buy these properties are going to have to deal with people that are racist, discriminatory, disrespectful, and humiliating at the time of purchasing a property. People like Chinese Americans who are U.S. citizens, Puerto Ricans who are born U.S. citizens, and people like Cubans who are U.S. citizens by naturalization. 54% of Americans are unaware that Puerto Ricans are born U.S. citizens. With over 1 million Puerto Ricans in the state of Florida, that means that roughly 500,000 Floridians, when they go to purchase a home, are going to encounter a realtor who's going to think they're illegal, even though they're born a U.S. citizen. Realtors have to comply with Fair Housing Act laws. This law is so confusing that realtors are just being told that their customers, buyers, sellers may just simply need to consult a lawyer. Property insurance has increased as much as 77% for some people in Florida who are being forced to get flood insurance on a 10th story apartment. Add to that now you're going to need another lawyer to have a real estate transaction in the state of Florida. Because these laws are so confusing, it's not expected that anybody involved, even a realtor, will know how to proceed about it. Meaning simply that if you're buying real estate in Florida, you may have to deal with outright discrimination that's not legal within the Fair Housing Act regulations. Already, Florida realtors are having a huge problem with something called steering, which means that if you're a Hispanic or black person, they automatically try to force you into certain communities like Lehigh Acres, which in just a few years has become about 70% Hispanic, thanks to all the steering that realtors in Lee County, Florida have been doing. And while this is illegal in the state of Florida, if you were to hire a lawyer to formally draft a complaint against a realtor who's involved in steering, but it was completely inconclusive. So imagine now that on a state level, you're being encouraged to discriminate even as is. With the Fair Housing Act regulations, realtors in the state of Florida have absolutely no problem violating the ethics that they're required to have a real estate license. So imagine now that they're being encouraged basically to discriminate against people who are not perceived to be U.S. citizens by people who 54% of them think that Puerto Ricans are not U.S. citizens. There are organizations within the Asian communities that are involved in real estate, and they're already pressing lawsuits. This is what's informally known as a kangaroo court. Basically, the laws are so undefined and inconclusive that it's left to the interpretation of people who 54% of which don't even know that Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. And a lot of Cubans and Puerto Ricans, which make up about 2 million people in the state of Florida, simply assume that they're going to be treated fairly. They're going to find out with laws like Show Me Your Documents or these laws that are being implemented in Florida that humiliation is going to become a common part of business transactions. And if you're buying a home, you can expect the same treatment. The inconclusive nature of this law will give them a good opportunity to know what I already learned while living in the state of Alabama under laws like SB-264, where even though I was a U.S. citizen, I was constantly humiliated by having to prove it. And then when you prove to them with your documentation that you were a U.S. citizen, they would do things like spit on your documents or tell you that they don't care what part of Mexico you're from. A lot of Cubans and Puerto Ricans in the state of Florida really need a good wake-up call to how they're really viewed by other people. And the way this law is set up is going to give them a great opportunity to find out. These laws are quote-unquote anti-illegal immigration. However, the way they're implemented isn't so much affecting illegal immigration, but it is to humiliate U.S. citizens and to remind them or outright exclude them from the financial rights that their U.S. citizenship entitles by people who are simply ignorant. The fact that these laws just leave this space open with no defined regulations means that ignorant people in the state of Florida will simply be able to turn down somebody they don't want to work with based on their race. And sure, the Latino in Florida is a little bit blinded by their regionalistic views, but buyers from other states are definitely not going to fall for it. And you can be assured that even organizations like the NAACP that protect the rights of African Americans have pretty much warned people throughout the United States that Florida's probably not a state you want to go to because these laws simply open up a window for uncontrolled discrimination with absolutely no adverse effect to the person doing it. Florida real estate law was already a mess in this particular category. Now this just opens up a huge window to allow this type of behavior. And you may think, well, I'm an American, this doesn't really affect me. Here's where you're wrong. When you're making a real estate transaction, the last thing you want is more lawyers, more disputes. You don't want to buy a property in uncharted legal territory. In the interest of real estate associations within the state of Florida, which are very down the middle, they have lobbyists on both sides of the situation to make sure they get what they need. They're calling this outright insanity because it doesn't define very much and it leaves a lot of things to be determined. For example, in the illegal immigration aspect, they're going to require employers to use E-Verify. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you're a realtor, you're probably in that process already. Just like you have an E-Verify for potential employees, if you had a system like E-Verify for potential buyers and sellers in the state of Florida, that would make things a lot easier in the real estate market if a buyer shows up and they're verified through the state. But if you have undefined boundaries, laws, and regulations that are just left to the interpretation of anybody, like at that point, you're making real estate transactions unappealing to a lot of people. Once that buyer was registered, then a realtor would not have to do the job of making any type of personal determination. You create a comprehensive verification system on a state level that will be required to anybody buying real estate in the state of Florida. That takes all of these questions out of the way and makes the transactions easier. That's logical, and understanding the framework of E-Verify, it would make sense that the lawmakers who made this law knew that they could have implemented it as well to buyers, but they didn't. They're not looking to make real estate transactions easier. They're looking to allow people to discriminate anyone they want based off of their personal prejudice. I'm not against restricting certain people from other countries from buying in the state of Florida. That doesn't make any sense. But the state of Florida should get together with the real estate associations within the state and create a comprehensive database that has a lot of accountability to make real estate transactions easier. But again, these laws aren't about making real estate more practical and informed in the state of Florida. The goal here is just simply to marginalize U.S. citizens who come from some other type of background from being able to have a normal real estate transaction without disrespect and humiliation. If the goal was to make things better, then the clear answer would be to have an E-Verify type program for potential buyers and sellers. And crap, even for renters. I have a friend who has real estate. They had somebody walk into a property, apply for a rental, and then sue the real estate company for discrimination. According to the Fair Housing Act laws, they actually want a settlement in court saying that the real estate company discriminated them based off of their race. They actually took money from this realtor. And this is a legit Florida real estate scam that's orchestrated by lawyers out of Orlando to get money out of regular realtors or people who have a lot of real estate and do their own renter application forms. Most of the time, these realtors are going to give up the money because they don't want to be caught in some weird racist lawsuit. They just give up the money. The time's not worth it. They lose money by this scam. Imagine if now you had a verification system, somebody comes to rent or buy a property from you, and you can see, hey, this person's had 20 different disputes in courts. Now you have a database that you can use to tell if the potential buyer is problematic. You take that to your lawyer says, hey, there's no issues here, or your lawyer says, hey, here's a red flag. This person's had 20 different issues in court, or their previous contracts had these problems. You have people that systematically get into contracts because they know a loophole, so they can sue people and make their lives absolutely miserable. And they're able to do this back to back to dozens of potential buyers and sellers because there are loopholes in the law. And what this new law is going to do, and mark my words, Florida is about to see 100 new scams, 100 new frauds, because all these potentials for people to exploit this new law, there are scammers waiting to jump on the opportunity to find new ways to exploit potential buyers or sellers. Real estate law doesn't like fast changes, doesn't like a lot of changes, because you really have to study how the laws and how the regulations and contracts in place are being implemented. And if there's any discretions that need to be fixed, it's a long and steady process. But when you introduce this unknown factor of all these laws that nobody can understand, kangaroo court type discrimination bound laws that encourage people to have absolutely no ethics, which is kind of like a principle within the real estate world, you're setting yourself up for a lot of scams, frauds. This isn't good for the real estate world and Florida real estate associations. they're not blind to that. They understand that this opens a lot of doors for bad things to happen. And we're not just talking about discrimination. We're talking about scams, frauds, lawyers, lawsuits, even loopholes that could leave you in uncertainty if you're buying or selling a property in the state of Florida. Who wants to put themselves in that position? There's already a scam targeting realtors through the federal housing laws. Imagine now if on the state level, people are being put in a vulnerable position. This puts people who are realtors and that are willing to discriminate people at risk of being sued, but safety is no longer the priority. Common sense is no longer the priority. They know these anti-immigration discriminatory laws don't make sense. And guess what? They don't care. They're not creating an environment of prosperity. They're creating an environment of discrimination. And while the vast majority of Cubans and Puerto Ricans in Florida have been rocked to sleep, the vast majority of people in other states, they're not stupid. They understand what's going on in the state of Florida, and they're not going to invest. They're probably not even going to vacation here. And the state of Florida is going to take a huge economical hit. And guess what? They know that, and they don't care. You think Alabama and Mississippi can't get their crap together and become a normal state? Of course they could. Are they going to do it? Absolutely not. Because they don't care about inclusion. They care about continuing to promote their hate. And don't think that these monetary incentives are going to make a difference to these people. A lot of the money that pushed this wave of growth in Florida wasn't retirement money. It was Venezuelan money. It was Chinese money. It was people who left Puerto Rico because of Hurricane Maria, and they want to eliminate the power of acquisition of Asian and Hispanics in Florida because they are becoming the predominant economical factor here. They're realizing that Brazilians, Argentinians, and Venezuelans are outpricing rich Americans in their competition for real estate. Some of these guys are coming from Venezuela with 30, 40, 50 million US dollars in cash, and they have absolutely no contingency of buying a $15 million piece of real estate like it's nothing. A lot of those people had intentions to live and work and be part of the society in Florida. I don't inherently think there's anything wrong with people wanting to live in Florida if they're coming from somewhere else. The real problem is the investors that are just buying stuff to speculate with no real interest in ever being part of the United States. But this situation lends itself perfectly as a good scapegoat to get rid of a lot of Hispanic and Asian investors in the state of Florida. Those are the types of people you want in your country. If there's one thing Canada has done right, is that they've attracted wealthy and skilled immigrants to their country. If there's one thing the United States has done wrong, is that with a broken immigration system that only attracts poor and unskilled people to live in an invisible, marginalized legal status that doesn't exist, promising them a dream and a hope that never fulfills, to never actually succeed, and to never incorporate into the American society. African Americans of good economical sources have also started to move to Florida from the Deep South, trying to escape racism. Little do they know that in the state of Florida, it's starting to become like the Deep South. With the help of these types of laws, by the way, this is going to encourage a lot of people to move to Florida. But what they don't know is that these laws, while appearing to promote their political ideology in real estate laws, they're unaware that you're being exposed to a lot of liability. Take the home insurance thing in Florida, where, hey, I'm in a 10th-story condo, but my homeowner's insurance just went up 77% in case my 10th floor apartment happens to flood. This is really going to increase a lot of liability. Is it going to attract a bunch of people to Florida who think now Florida doesn't have illegal immigrants? But what they don't know is that the large majority of Hispanics in Florida are U.S. citizens, and these people are coming from a background of racism and hate, they're going to assume that Cubans that are legal and Puerto Ricans that are born U.S. citizens are illegals, and they may as well go and disrespect these people, ask them for their documents. And let me tell you, if you ask one of these Puerto Ricans that's a U.S. born citizen, probably has a military background, come at them with some type of disrespectful racist crap, show me your papers, I don't know how they're going to react. And this is probably going to lead to a lot of violence as well, because I know for a fact the type of people you're dealing with here in South Florida, if you outright disrespect them, there's no telling what could happen. Once they're exposed to systematic discrimination, humiliation, and disrespect, and Hispanics make up 25% of the state of Florida, so do your own assumptions on which direction Florida is really going to head. I mean, the state of Florida is literally going to ask realtors to violate the code of ethics that they promised to uphold when they became a realtor. I mean, it's interesting, with as disgusting as the real estate world is, as much fraud, scam, and deception that's out there, that words like morals and ethics are actually part of the process to become a realtor. It's almost hilarious. But when they violate these federal laws, the person who's left at a liability is going to be you, the buyer, you, the customer. It's crazy how this is actually going to attract a lot of buyers to the state of Florida, yet they fail to notice that they're actually buying into more liability than ever. It's like what insurance companies are doing now in the state of Florida. This is completely shameless behavior. Flying colors, man, they go ahead and do it. It doesn't matter how embarrassing and how openly offensive their greed is. They go ahead and do it like it's nothing. Delinquent homes are at the lowest level they've ever been. So it's not like people are losing houses. People who've bought houses in Florida are holding on to them just fine, better than ever. Montgomery, Alabama currently has the most affordable real estate market in the entire country, predominantly due to laws like HB-56. Do you think they care that they destroy their own state's economy and potential? Alabama could be a growing star right now in the South if they had reasonable real estate laws. They don't. Do they care? Absolutely not. A while back, I made some videos exposing how messed up real estate laws were in Alabama. A bunch of realtors in Alabama made reply videos to my video. They were very angry and upset that I exposed what was wrong with that state's real estate laws while praising Florida real estate laws. But that's all changing. With how shamelessly delinquent insurance companies have become in this state, I have no intentions of owning real estate here. And now with these new regulations that are encouraging people to discriminate buyers, the buyers that make up a huge bulk of the people who are investing in Florida, because at the end of the day, the only people who are really buying in Florida to live in Florida and stay in Florida for a long time, not be a transient buyer, because these buyers that are coming from New York, these are transient buyers. They're not even in retirement age. The real organic fiber that makes communities, which is long-term success for the state of Florida and its people, is not these out-of-state buyers. These out-of-state buyers, they're gone in 2 to 3 years. The real people that were moving to Florida and creating lives in Florida, Cubans and Puerto Ricans that live in Florida, they might be fooled. They're already living here. They're having a honeymoon. But Puerto Ricans, like all other Latino Americans in other states that are U.S. citizens, are not going to look at Florida and be like, you ain't going to catch me down there getting humiliated, because they don't have to put themselves through that. So it's still up for grabs who is going to enforce these laws. It's going to be the police. Is it going to be the courts? Is it going to be local counties? Who's really going to enforce these laws? Are you really going to leave the enforcement of laws in the hands of people who took a 64-hour real estate course? Of course, the biggest concern with this law is that it's expelling and pretty much excluding people who are U.S. citizens from having access to real estate services. And it's federally not allowed, but the state of Florida is somehow going to encourage this type of behavior. You're opening a lot of windows to a lot of potential problems. It's like those ads that you see late night on TV. It's like, do you have back pain? This medication will take care of your back pain. You may have diarrhea, dizziness, rectal bleeding, enlarged eyeballs, and ear pain. You're like, hold on, man, I'll just let my back hurt. What does this law really do? And they're not leaving the country. They're just going to other states. I was just on a road trip, and I couldn't believe how many Florida tags I saw all over the United States. All the hotels that I stayed at, a vast majority of the people moving northbound were Florida people leaving the state of Florida. About 700,000 people are leaving the state of Florida. When we entered Canada and they saw our Florida tags, we were searched extensively. They took us in for questioning, and they thought that we were moving to Canada because we had to leave Florida for legal status, looking for work. It's created a nightmare for the rest of the country. What does that really fix? I mean, you're uprooting these people's lives in Florida. They're not leaving the country. They're just going to another state. It's just going to create a problem somewhere else. It doesn't really solve anything. Then you're leaving behind a void in these communities that will probably only get filled in by lower income people who are getting out of jail or moving here from other states. So you really want to attract low income people to a state that already has enough problems. You're creating opportunities for people to fail. Most poor people who move to the state of Florida end up homeless or leaving because they assume that this is like Maine or Kentucky where, well, we're going to make $18 an hour and pay $1,000 rent, when they realize that the math in Florida is 3 times harder than that. A lot of times they end up homeless. Then you have what's called liability discrimination, which means a realtor may just refuse to work with somebody for what she perceives or he perceives to be a liability. And in theory, that could be a liability if you do and a liability if you don't, because you're exposing everybody to more liabilities here. Lawyers in Florida may not be proactive at these types of things, but if they're coming from New York or California and they encounter this problem, they'll use an out-of-state lawyer, and most likely then it's going to create a lot of legal nightmares. It's one of those situations where you're creating a liability for realtors if they do, and then you're creating a liability for them if they don't. Just look at Alabama for answers. A house in Anniston, Alabama is $5,000. You go 45 minutes away to Georgia, the same house could be worth $300,000. These laws don't work.